It's no big deal. It's just a simple conversation, and you know, I've known you for a while now, and
a number of years, haven't we?
we talk about all manner of things, particularly cars and stuff like that. But I just wanted to sort of introduce you to people who might be listening to the podcast, or you know, I've now got this on YouTube, so we'll publish to YouTube as well for those people who I think, you know, the expression and seeing the person who you're talking to is always useful. And I guess the biggest issue that I've got currently with my podcast is I'm interviewing a lot of people with a lot of experience, and unfortunately most of them are Anglo elderly gentlemen. That's putting it kindly, I think. And I do want to get some diversity coming into this soon. So I'm going to approach Vina as well in the near future to see if I can get an hour with her and just talk about
I wish you luck. You can try.
I know.
But what you might be able to get from Vina is there's a lot of stuff already out there that you might be able to link to. But like I work with her and I'm lucky to see her once every 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, she's busy on the campaign trail, I think, isn't she?
She's doing... because of all the various sort of projects, grants and research things that we've got going, she's working 6 to 7 days a week.
Yeah, it'd be crazy.
And it is. It's pretty crazy. It's keeping me amused, to say the least.
Well, I remember before you sort of went there, Michael and I had been working with Michael Sharp.
Yeah.
And I'm about to do a project with Michael as well down in the south of the state. And she was, you know, all over the place, zipping everywhere. And Michael was a good partner for that because he loved to zip everywhere too. Yeah. So I guess for the benefit of people who might listen, can you just tell us your name and a little bit about your background, where you started?
Okay, well, Keith Monaghan, that's my name. I'm one of these people who might call an idiot. I've worked in manufacturing all my life. Basically over 50 years at this current time. I started off doing a trade through TAFE. I did fitter machining, fitter welding, then tool making. And through TAFE I did my engineering courses, plus economics and marketing. So that's basically my general background. Worked initially in an organisation, R.E. Davis, sorry, that's the last organisation, Davies Kent, which it was around the end of the Vietnam War, and we did some interesting work. They used to make clockwork mechanisms that were on the bombs, the only private company to do that sort of work for the government. So I learned how to make watch parts. So I can make a watch for this sort of stuff, gears, mechanisms for watches, because they're all watch parts. And that organisation did that through water meters, plastic mouldings, metal pressing, forming, and the likes. So I got a very good diversified skill set out of it, had a very good tool room. In fact, they used to put on 2 apprentices every year, and very much supportive. And if it wasn't for that, I would not have had the diversified skill set I gained in that organisation. And they allowed me to come through to the engineering. I moved into their manufacturing engineering area in that organisation. So it started the direction of my career.
Where did you go to TAFE?
Initially Guymere, then St George and Ultimo.
Oh, okay.
The interesting thing back in those days, and that sounds good back in those days, we had to, when we enrolled for toolmaking, we had to get there before the enrolment started. They were running toolmaking courses every day and nights, and you had to get in there early, and a lot of people missed out on getting into the TAFE courses for toolmaking back then. That's when Australia manufactured stuff, lots of stuff. So for my engineering, I did that at St George and Ultimo. At very late night, you learn where to get some feed between work and going to TAFE. At one stage there, I was doing 1 full day and 4 nights.
So in your apprenticeship, were you going to TAFE in the daytime?
Day release apprenticeship. And the company was good. They allowed us to do the 4 years. So you did the 3 years here, fitting, machining, fitting, welding, and then the 4th year for tool making, and they allowed you to take the day.
And how long was your apprenticeship at that time?
It started off as a 5-year apprenticeship, but in my first year it dropped back to 4 year. That's when they restructured it.
Yeah, there's been a number of, I guess, shrinking of the number of years that apprentices have done. I know at one stage it was 9 years. speaking of Fraser, I think his was 6.
Yeah.
And then it was 5 and 4, and at the moment we're in a competency-based system that sort of, well, you could compound it down to 3 if you wanted to. It's really the program of training that TAFE delivers, but yeah, it's quite interesting how things have changed over the years.
Yeah, and it's interesting in that I can remember back doing my trade, and I can remember the work we've done and the work I've done running organisations, and you can see people that you could run through a course very quickly. They've got the skill sets, they pick it up very well, and so you could do that. But other people, they take a long time to pick up the skill sets, let's call it.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I moved into tool making, coming from an industry that did some very precise and very accurate tool making work, I found the course not, I wouldn't say easy, but the skill sets, I'd already had the skill sets, where a lot of people who took on tool making didn't have the skill sets and the understanding of what was needed to do that very fine and precise work. So that was really interesting.
So I guess that you're sort of going back to the future a bit with you're showing me the models you're making at the moment in that sort of almost miniature. I don't know if I've got the eyesight for it.
Oh, that's what I see. I got magnifying glasses and everything else. So yeah, but it is to keep the dexterity up, which you do gain in your trades.
Yeah.
As you know, at the moment I'm doing some work with the University of New South Wales Smart Centre, and we're working with young graduates there. And you see, they just don't have the dexterity, and you've got to train that into them. And that's an interesting, almost, sometimes it's eye-opening to when you've come through the trade backgrounds that you and I have.
Yeah.
You build up a skill set which is sort of second nature, and you think, oh no, that's right, people don't understand or haven't got that dexterity to do those skills.
It's a real motor skill thing, isn't it? And my assumption, I guess, is with a lot of the university students that you'd get into University of New South Wales, they're very academically adept, but converting that knowledge into a physical output in through your hands is probably a bit of a foreign concept for some of them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You've really got to make them understand what they're doing and the potential safety problems in the areas that they work with. You'll see they're walking out, whoa, stop, don't do that. That's dangerous. Oh, is it? And it's just building up that skill set and that knowledge set.
Yeah.
And that's for vet training and the likes, that's a very good basis. You learn as you go.
Yeah.
I remember, excuse me, in the fitting machine, one of the early jobs you did was the cast iron block.
Yeah, I remember that.
And what that taught you was how to hit something with a hammer. Now, I was lucky. I had that skill set from growing up. My father was a boilermaker, welder, so I knew how to weld, I knew how to do all that. But the number of kids starting that had bruises around their knuckles from missing and not understanding how to swing a hammer.
There's a lot of lessons learned in that little project. I remember when I did it, and I did it in the Navy actually, where you get a cast iron block and you're given, I think, a very minimal amount of tools. I think you were given a hacksaw, a cold chisel, a hammer, a file, and maybe a scraper.
Yeah, that's right, scraper.
And that, you were given dimensions, and it was a rough cut block. And after time, when you got your cold chisel, it was mushroomed over at the end, and you had to maintain the tool before you actually started to use it. So it taught you a whole heap of lessons, even to the extent of making sure that the head of the hammer isn't glazed. So you're making sure when you're striking the cold chisel, it actually grips the cold chisels.
Yeah. And it's got to skip off.
It's not going to skip off. Yeah. So it was quite an interesting little project to start off with, and it actually tested your patience, right?
Oh, geez, yeah. It did. And you learn a couple of things, and I shouldn't pass this on, but if someone's annoying you and not filing it, you used to wipe your hand across the top of it, and they put the file in, it slipped straight off because you put just a film of oil on the cast iron, and it just made it difficult until you got the file to bite. So that used to be a favourite stunt. You walk around and which you shouldn't have done, but you did.
Yeah, all those silly things that we did. And even using bluing ink for the first time, I think is the beginning of, when you're doing the engineering stuff, is the beginning of understanding how you get marking out, working, and transferring from drawings, dimensions into a physical item.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you learn skills like you say, scraping. And what I learnt, one of the things I learnt there was you can do a signature in your scrape.
Yeah.
And I started looking, because later in my career I was buying a lot of machinery. And the really good stuff, they machine them with machines, but the final thing they did, they'd have these specialist scrapers would scrape the beds on the machines. And I bought quite a number of machines from Akuma, a large Japanese manufacturer, and the guys at Akuma could tell you which guy finished the bed by the style of the scrape that
really
they did.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they were just
it's almost like a fingerprint
it is
approach.
a fingerprint approach to it, and that's just the skills that you can build up. Each individual person builds up.
Well, another thing that sort of occurred to me about, when you're given a bit of tool steel and you had to turn it into a scraper, that's a sharpening skill. I was talking to another friend of mine just recently who he started out a fitter and machinist on the railways, and he said, the one thing he never got the gist of was sharpening drills. And I said, well, it's quite easy. If you've sharpened a bit of tool steel in the past, it's just the opposite. Instead of a concave, you have a convex surface, but it's got to have a little bit of a relief on the back of it, so you're not actually contacting the material as you're removing it.
We in my apprenticeship, we had a job. I know the size of the drill. It was the P drill, and it was the dry flange on the minis, and they had 4 holes drilled in it. And we had this guy, big weightlifter, on this manual drill, driving these P drills through. And as an apprentice, you had to sharpen the P drills, and they had to be sharpened accurately because there was a tolerance on the hole. And so you very quickly learnt how to sharpen a drill correctly and how to make it work in production. And there's a real art to it. And so I show that to people. Look at some drills, and you teach them how to sharpen a drill, and they start to learn. But it's not an easy art to pick up.
No, and look, if you over temp the thing when you're grinding it, it can be a problem, create a worse problem for yourself. So where did you go after you finished your apprenticeship? How long did you stay in that job? And then
I was at Davies Kent for about 8 years. And it was interesting. I did my apprenticeship and I went up through engineering, and I was in charge of one of the areas I was in charge of was the automotive section. We were making components for Mitsubishi and what is now PIMA brakes, and in that we developed machinery. It was really good because we had a specialist purpose machinery in that, work with brass and the likes. And then we got a phone call from Mitsubishi, stop the line now, not tomorrow, middle of the day. And that was in the mid-70s when we had that recession. I was made redundant. I was out of work for about, I think, 2 weeks. And I got a job at Bendix Corporation. Now, Bendix Corporation made fuel systems, power steering systems at West Botany Street, Rockdale, filters, had a very large die casting plant, some of the best die casting you see. And I started in the fuel system area with a group of manufacturing engineers. There would have been probably 10 to 11 plus probably 4 or 5 tool design draftsmen there. And I started working in the fuel area on the jets, working and developing the production systems, improving the production systems where the jets were made and where the floats, remember the floats in there, they were all soldered. And that whole area produced the Stromberg and Carter carburetors plus the fuel pumps for all the car manufacturers in Australia. And they were running 2 shifts, and they had 6 assembly stations just assembling carburetors. I was then moved into the power steering section, which was an integral gear invented by Arthur Bishop. And very interesting man. I worked with Arthur on a few of his projects and around some of his very unique designs in and around the valve and the power adjusting valve on the steering systems, the valve and input shafts. He developed a one-piece sleeve, and it was classic. He designed this one-piece sleeve, and he was part of what was a company known as LBL, Lever Bishop Longhurst, and they were a machine tool designer and a manufacturer, as well as designing steering systems. And this one-piece valve, Arthur Bishop went to Harry Lever and said, we need to make a machine. And Harry looked at it and said, I can't make a machine, I'll invent something. So Arthur Bishop invented the action, and Harry designed the machine and produced the machine for making the valves, this machine went all around the world. These developments from Australia went all around the world. I was also involved with making what they call a variable ratio wide form rack, which was the first variable ratio rack and pinion system made for the world. Again, that technology went all around the world. Basically, at the end of the peak of the hydraulic steering systems, nearly every single hydraulic steering system in a car had some form of Arthur Bishop technology in it, invented in Australia.
It's funny, I've never heard the name before. Maybe it's just my lack of knowledge about the automotive industry.
Yeah, Arthur was a genius, and he was a real character.
Yeah.
Just one of these unique people.
Yeah.
And really good to work with, and really pushed the envelope. And Harry Lever, he was a unique guy in machine tool design and basic thinking in and around improving processes, improving machinery, and the likes. Yeah, they used to build special purpose machinery for Westinghouse.
Yeah.
The curved door fridges. They built an automatic line which took the metal, the sheet material, formed it fully up, and stacked it without people touching it for a magnetic seal fridge. When the heads of Westinghouse came out from America, they'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
That's how far advanced these guys were in the world.
Yeah, it seems to be a common theme, and a lot of the innovation that Australians have does get adopted into other production lines and countries, and we seem to have been, from the Hills Hoist to the Victor lawnmower, whatever it might have been.
Yeah.
We've been a very innovative bunch, and that's why I'm really keen to talk to Vina, because I know she was on the inventors, and she would have an interesting perspective on this as well. And just one of the things that we're majorly missing out on is because we don't have, national policy around manufacturing and making sure that we're manufacturing and growing the industry in Australia. A lot of that innovation is being, lost offshore and is heading into those other nations. Even people that are coming out of the University of New South Wales, I know the mix of people who are coming from other countries to study at university, they're coming here, getting in a lot of the smarts, and then taking it back offshore, and actually, it's diminishing returns for us. We might be leading the world in vocational or higher education training, but we're actually having a negative effect because we're not able to innovate and manufacture things and sell those things to the world.
Yeah, I don't care which side of politics it is, neither understand manufacturing or really want to support manufacturing. And you look at the countries that are leading the world in manufacturing, they support their industries, they buy from their industries, they actually financially support it, because the multiplier effect is a high value to the country. If you employ one person in manufacturing, the support employs up to 6 to 10 other people to support that one person in manufacturing. Mining, it's lucky to have 2 people to support that one person in mining. And a lot of people forget that there's this great multiplier, that you put one job in manufacturing, it's a huge multiplier. You employ another 6 people to support that area. So
it'd be interesting on your point of view on this about, and obviously you worked in a lot of the supply chain for the automotive industry. When they closed Mitsubishi and Holden, what were your views about that?
I thought it was very narrow-sighted, and a lot of this is driven by lobbyists, and we know what they're like. They've got this particular focus. And GM had political problems and the likes, but Toyota said they would stay in Australia if there was one other car company. And it didn't matter who it was, as long as another car company, because that gave a bit of economy of scale for supply chains.
Yeah.
Toyota lost face when they shut down Melbourne. The Melbourne plant for Toyota was the first Toyota plant outside of Japan in the world, and they were really disappointed with that. And we know that the automotive industry was an incredible training ground, and so many other industries like ResMed, Cockley, all these other industries, the plastics industries that I work in and have worked in, that most people that are driving that industry were trained in some form of company that supplied or the automotive industry, and that was a very, very hard and brilliant training ground. Just to give you an example, everyone thinks lean, and a lot of organisations, we're going to go lean, and they started looking at this in 2000, in the early 2000s. We set up a full just-in-time plant, which is the basis of lean, for TRW in 1982.
Yeah.
And Toyota praised that plant as being one of the best plants outside Japan. And so the automotive industry is about 20 years ahead of the rest of industry. And it's interesting, you get people, we're going to do this, hang on, I did that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
What do you mean by it? And then you start explaining to them. And I've had consultants come to me and say, I can help you in this industry. I said, guy, you got it wrong, explain it to him. And tell him I did this in the 80s, and they say, I wasn't born then.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of the knowledge isn't passed down, is it? It's sort of, people have these things as bolts out of the blue, and they think it's a new invention, and not realising. And I guess that's part of our problem, is that we haven't been keeping the corporate knowledge into the people who are coming into the industry, or even those people who are policymakers making decisions for the industry.
Yeah, and it is. I don't think the industry has had a decent voice in policy making. There's always this bottom line money focus. Why the government paying money in this area? Well, hang on, the government throws a lot of money around in areas where they don't get any result, and it's difficult. And manufacturing is starting to come back from that, but it's taken a lot. And I look around, and there was a lot of skills, but I don't see a lot. How can I explain this? When the automotive industry was running, there was a lot of dynamic skills coming out of that industry and spreading through a lot of industry. You're not seeing that as much now. And I know people who run organisations that are looking for that dynamic skills. And I know when I ran R.E. Davison's, if I saw someone with it, I'd foster them and train them up and bring them up to speed. But they were few and far between. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. Where when you had the three, four, or five car companies in Australia, there was a lot of support industries that were fostering these skills and bringing these skills up.
Yeah. And
a lot of that skill's gone overseas.
Yeah.
All you got to do is look at GM. It's run by the Australian mafia in America. They call it the Australian mafia. In the design and development side of things over there.
Well, I know even with Tesla and companies like that and SpaceX, there's a lot of Australian trained people who are working in those companies who drive the financial benefit of those companies for foreign nations.
Well, the CEO of Tesla's an Australian woman.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and she's got control.
Yeah, and it's great for our bragging rights, but it doesn't do much for us as a nation, to be honest.
And the one thing we don't do as a nation is we don't publicise that. We don't publicise our skill sets and where Australians are in this world to highlight that they've got their training here and the benefit of that training and what it's done. And that's something that's very lacking. And not only in manufacturing, in medical and those sort of areas. We tend to talk about arts, and that's good, but the people with the power are accountants and lawyers. The most non-productive area for the country.
I wonder if any of it has to do with our own culture, though, about the tall poppy syndrome, and we don't like braggadocious people. And although we get on with things and get things done, and we're quite capable. We don't necessarily like, waving our flag and promoting ourselves too loudly.
It is, because your DSG gearboxes in most of your cars, especially your VW groups and that, were designed in Castle Hill in Sydney. Yeah. And that's people don't realise that. Yeah. Well,
I know gearboxes, diffs, all those sort of things were all things that were done here first, and then sold to the world.
Yeah, that's right.
And the technology. Let's have a little bit of chat about the plastics industry experience you've had, because this is where we first met. You're a representative on the New South Wales ITAB for the plastics industry. Tell us a little bit about your career in the plastics sector.
Yeah, well, my career, I came through the automotive. I did about 20 odd years as tier 1 suppliers through Bendix and TRW. Then I rolled into furniture fit outs, big commercial furniture fit outs, and I did have a lot of involvement in plastics as a sideline in the various industries I worked through. And then I got a position as general manager of the R.E. Davison Group. And that was a diversified engineering organisation which did composites, thermosets and thermoplastics, as well as metals, deep drawing and some chemical processes. And so that was very good. Running the organisation, family-owned company, not a large organisation, but again, a dynamic organisation. And with me leading a dynamic organisation, and we did things in that organisation which, again, people say, no, you can't do that. A classic example, I was in a composite conference in Germany, and I said, we do the radomes for the mobile network antennas out of this material. Material that was developed in Australia, dome moulding compound. And they said, the Germans, impossible, you can't do that at that thickness and that size. Yeah, I'll do it. How many? I said, I've done 50,000 so far. And they said, well, you'll have to tell us how. I said, no, but I'll make stuff for you. I know we don't do that. We don't. And this was back in the 90s. The 90s. I was just trying to think. And they sort of started. This was in Munich. How long did it take you to get here, and how long did it take? I said, I'm going back by China and Taiwan and that. And they said, China won't really affect us. I said, it's starting to affect you now. And we've been living with China and the effect of China for the last 20 odd years or more, and get used to it. And Europe was still a bit naive about the effect of China, even though they're just starting to see it. They didn't realise what was coming at them fairly quickly.
Yeah. Well, I know you've said to me in the past about tendering for major projects and the frustration that you felt around, you put all these specs together about how you're going to do things, and then the Chinese go and pinch all that stuff and manufacture at a cheaper price.
Yeah, I did for one major customer, a major multinational, work with their design department to design the product so it was mouldable. And I lost a job for 10 cents, even though I saved them 40 cents a part. I lost a job for 10 cents a part into China. And that was the last time I worked with any of their engineers.
And this is, I guess, one of the messages that I try to promote amongst, particularly government policymakers, is that, it might sound good and cheap at the outset to have things offshored or to give other people those capabilities, but in the longer term, we're cutting our own throats. Obviously R.E. Davidson is a good example in the sense that, and I know you were doing a real diversified, I remember you were doing balls there for a while.
The blanks for lawn bowls.
You did Bakelite plates, you did, I always use it's a phenolic switching, which is, other people would know as, what is that material called, commonly known as?
Phenolic.
But what?
Bakelite.
Bakelite is the thing,
yeah. And we were doing a lot of technical stuff because in your high voltage industry, you usually use, there are thermoset plastics, melamine, urea, Bakelite, unsaturated polyesters. They are not easily recycled, but the beauty is, if you look in a let's say a power box at home, these materials will last 50, 60, 80, 100 years. And they've got very good electrical properties, they've got very good heat properties. So when you get into high voltage transformers, the kiosks, you see the green kiosks around the place where the 13,000 volts come in, everything in that is thermosets, because if they get a short, they don't melt, they don't catch on fire. So we were doing a lot of work in that area, in the very high voltage area. Like we were making specialist plugs to take up to 800 amps. Your normal plug you put in your wall socket is 10 amps, so that gives you an idea of what it was. We're doing a lot of those sort of areas. We were doing decorative plates out of melamine. We used to make knobs for the cookers, the cooktops, and that out of phenolic and melamine. And we were making probably up to 4 to 5 million of them a year. And then that went to China. And they came back and said, your knobs don't have a gate scar, the ones in China's do. Yep. How do you do that? It's our IP.
Mm.
And, oh, you're not going to tell us? No, it's our IP. I'd learned by that time.
Yeah.
And that was something that was invented in Australia.
Yeah.
There was processes that were used and are now used right around the world that were invented in Australia.
Yeah.
How to mould dough moulding compound in injection moulding process. Majority of it was done in compression moulding. That was perfected in Australia in R.E. Davison's.
Yeah.
So, and that's again that Australian initiative, and we worked with the material supplier and set up partnerships to do that.
Yeah.
We should have patented it. We would have made a fortune.
And look, unfortunately, we're using Chinese as a whipping boy. I don't think we can necessarily blame China for this, because we've played a role in it. I know I've spoken to some of the members of PIMA in the past about their ability to be competitive in Australia for a variety of reasons, and some of them have set up dual sort of businesses, some in Thailand and places like that, to try and compete. And look, I know even the defence industry, people will set up under an American flag in the US so they can get American contracts and tenders, mainly because those countries have actually done the right thing by their local industries and put some protections in to make sure that their work, their business went to their own companies. Yeah.
Well, just to balance it out, I used to buy tooling from China.
Yeah.
And I got very good service from the people, but I went over there, I assessed the organisations I work with, and built up a relationship. And I was getting tooling from China. I was getting machinery out of China, not so much, but other people. I was getting machinery out of Taiwan. I was importing materials in from Taiwan and from Indonesia.
Yeah.
And some of these materials that I was importing used to be manufactured in Australia. And you can't blame the Chinese government. They've had a focus.
Yeah.
And you can see it's been a strong, continuous focus. And they supported it. They put money in it. I know of one organisation that was in Hong Kong, and the Chinese government basically came in and offered them money to move the whole organisation to Shenzhen.
Yeah.
And once they got there, they got the support, and that's a very large organisation in the moulding area.
And that's one of the things with Australia, China, they've got a 50-year to 200-year strategy around a lot of their industry, whereas we seem to go from, political...
election to election, 3
years.
Well,
I don't even know if it's election to election. Sometimes it's minister to minister.
Yeah.
As ministers get rolled for one reason or another.
The classic is that when the GFC hit in 2008, China had a program of putting in high-speed rail, passenger rail.
Yeah.
And that was to finish by 2020. They realised they need to employ people. They were funding it, so they then moved the target date back to 2015.
Yeah.
Now, one of the main reasons they were putting the high-speed rail in was to get passengers rails off the goods network, because it was slowing the goods getting to the coast.
Yeah.
So that was part of their reasoning for doing the high-speed rail.
And this is one of our biggest challenges, isn't it? We run passenger and freight on the same lines, and actually we're competing for space on rail lines.
And the other interesting thing, I was in Xiamen going out to look at a couple of moulding companies, and got a train, high-speed rail up to a place. Then we got in a car, and we came up on this new freeway they're building, and it was 3 lanes in either direction, and it came to a mountain. And they put a tunnel through the mountain. But while they had the tunnelling equipment, they put another 2 tunnels beside it for the future.
Build in growth potential.
And I thought, and they said, we had the boring equipment here. We knocked the other 2 tunnels, because one of the building tunnels with these boring, part of his problem is getting the boring equipment in and out.
Yeah.
So they just bunged it through.
Yeah, I know some of the boring equipment, I may be wrong in this, but from what I understand, particularly all the tunnelling that's been happening around Sydney, some of those boring drills, for want of a better term, are left in situ. They don't remove them because it's too costly to pull them out. So why wouldn't you just move them to another place, or go and
move
do
them
a
sideways
bit more?
and do another one? It's interesting. The government support. The current Chinese government is going back very much to almost Mao's levels, and I've heard that from people in China and people in Australia. It's going back to the real communist control.
Right.
Where it was interesting, a lot of things in China up until this current government level were very free, a lot freer than what we are in Australia in some of our rules and regulations. So it's going to be interesting times, and I don't know what the result's going to be and how it's going to come out as an economical situation, because Europe is starting to put controls on China as well as America. And does Australia become the whipping boy for all of that? Who knows?
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. So just coming back to the plastics industry for now, I believe you're still involved with PIMA. You play a role with them.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got a history. And what's the state of play with plastics at the moment? In
Plastics is it did consolidate down, but there's a lot of stuff coming back from China because of this. All of a sudden, we've started to talk about sovereign risk, and there's a lot of jobs that have been reshored, and it's mainly around the sovereign risk situation, because right at the moment they're having problems getting supplies.
Yeah.
COVID has really knocked the world around. Yeah, you can't get cars because they can't get electronic chips and semiconductors and all these sort of things, and so there is this look at what can we onshore. I know that a lot of the tooling that's coming in isn't up to the standard because of labour so cheap they can hand finish the standard into a product to a certain degree. I know there is now starting to become a shortage of tool makers in Australia at this current time to do the work, but you've seen a lot of that onshoring. The plastics industry is going well. It came back to a level, and it's starting to pick up a little bit more. And a lot of it is due to technology. We have some very, very good technology in Australia, especially around the medicals. There's a couple of organisations that are doing very well in around the medical.
So ResMed and Cochlear being the two majors.
Yeah, they're the drivers, and on those you've got the support industry, and a lot of that support industry is in Australia, and a number of those organisations are actually expanding into Malaysia and into America from an Australian base. So that's very good to see.
Yeah. So we're expecting, I guess, an influx or demand, and this is going to create another problem for us, because when we see these demands pick up, we have teacher shortages in places like TAFE and any other RTA for that matter, to train fitters and tool makers. And what about, and then there's the plastics operators who are going to be required to operate these systems? Yeah,
there's a TAFE course on that. There's apprenticeship in polymers, and you do need that skill set. A lot of the people in the plastics industry came from the metal trades, the fitting, the tool making area and that, and transitioned into the polymers. But we are now starting to get skill sets coming up through the polymer trades. A lot of the organisations are looking for training people. And it's interesting, one of the jobs, as you know, is I'm chair of the Industry Reference Committee, which sets up the vet training for process industry, recreational vehicle and laboratory ops. And part of process industry is the polymer training, PMB training package. And we've just done the update, and we got industry involved, and it has been restructured to meet what industry needs. In the past, it's been more driven by the TAFEs, the RTOs of the world. This is what we want to deliver. We believe this is what industry needs. This round of modifications and updates, I got a technical advisory committee which had RTOs on it, but had a very good cross-section of people who ran industry, ran plastic moulding, be it injection moulding, blow moulding, extrusion, had all these skill sets, as well as my base knowledge in and around composites. So we were able to restructure the training to suit industry needs. Still not there, but it's a lot closer than what it was. And we did upset and tread on a few toes going there, but we got what is needed. And that's what I'm looking for in all the packages that my IRC works on. Go back to the customer who's going to use the end result, find out what they need, and build the system up to give them what they need. And I think that to some extent in the past has been lacking.
Well, I need to talk to you anyway about recreational vehicles, because this is a unique issue, particularly around licensed trades who have to work in the wrecked vehicles industry, because as you know, it's basically putting a building on wheels. And you know, they've got some real challenges in New South Wales, particularly around electrical work and plumbing type work, because it's covered by the Home Building Act. These are quite complex conversations, and you know, sensitive negotiations that have to go on, particularly amongst the industrial parties. And you know, unfortunately, you know, some of those licensed trades, they believe that, you know, you almost have to be anointed and, you know, blessed before you can actually work on some of these things. I think it's appropriate training with the appropriate skill level, making sure that we don't hobble an industry. You know, particularly the wrecked vehicle industry in recent times has had a resurgence due to COVID. People aren't travelling offshore; they're going and buying a caravan.
I just put a deposit on a caravan. I'll be lucky to see it early next year.
Australian manufacturers.
Good. Yeah. All in Victoria. The major manufacturers are in Victoria. This is from an organisation called Avan, which is Avan and Gulf. But you've got Jayco, the biggest. They do about 47% of the wrecked vehicles in Australia. Very good site. I've been on their site down in South Dandenong. But we do that very well. And it's still, excepting for, say, your Jayco and maybe your Avan, and there's another one, I think it's
Corrimal is, I think, in Western Australia.
Yeah, but they've dropped off.
Have they?
They've subbed it out. I think they're more focused on the on-site mining housing, which is where they started. Those transportable homes. But you've got New Age. I think they're the three biggies. Jayco being the monster, and the other two being relative. But then a lot of it's cottage industry. But you can spend a fortune.
Oh, I know. You know, I really like Airstreams, but it's an American product. I'd rather an Australian product. If we could look at it as something retro like that in Australia, I'd really love something like that. So I guess, you know, and we don't want to be here forever. I don't want to take, I know today's a day off for you, I think, from your normal work, and just want to maybe explore that a little bit, what you've been doing with Venus Edgewalla and the University of New South Wales in your project around, I think it's green factories. Is that what you're doing?
Micro factories. What happened, and it was an interesting story. As I said earlier on, we imported machinery and that. And I attended an event at the Smart Centre at the University of New South Wales with you, just as an observer. And Vina asked me a few questions of what my company did, and I explained it, and she asked where it was. I said, "Oh, Rockdale. Oh, I can come and visit." Yeah, no problems whatsoever. And I thought, that'll be the last I hear. I get a phone call. She came out and visited, and said, "Oh, I need to send some people out." I said, "Yeah, no problems." Next morning, they're on the doorstep. And because I was importing moulding presses, they wanted one of them. I said, "Okay." So Ari Davison's, we set up and started to import the press for them, did all the right thing, pricing, everything else, met all the criteria. And then Ari Davison being a family-owned company, and all the family, they were the children of the original founder. They were in their 60s, they wanted to retire. No one in the family wanted to take the business on. The land was 7,500 square metres at Rockdale, so it was worth more than you could imagine. So they decided to shut the company.
That's one of the major problems, isn't it, for Australian manufacturing, is the cost of, you know, land and you know, rent and all those sort of things. If you can get rent for under $150 a square metre, you're going well these days. So there's a couple of key things I think there for industry: the physical assets, obviously the skills assets, being able to attract and retain skilled people. I think, you know, data and the access to data is a major issue too for manufacturers at the moment. One of the big ones was cost of utilities. So I know we digress slightly here, but if Ari Davison had gone on, the next year my electricity cost would have gone up 300%. It's ridiculous. We were at one stage, we had an advantage because we were some of the cheapest power in the world. They decided to go green, which is good. I've got no problems with that. But the governments didn't do it right. They started shutting off power, and they upped gas prices. And when they sold all the gas overseas, they never kept the reserve for Australia. Our gas prices, it was interesting. Australian gas was cheaper in Japan than when it was on the East Coast in Australia. You know, this is again lack of foresight in our government departments. And again, I don't care which side of politics you talk about. And the same with electricity.
people were complaining about their household bills are going up 20%. Industry was going up 300%, and that comes straight off the bottom line. And you couldn't go to a customer and say, I need to put my prices up. R.E. Davison, electricity was 5% of the total running cost of that organisation.
And it seems like, you know, we've sold our souls for a sugar hit, and then you end up suffering and starving afterwards. You know? It's just crazy.
Yeah. But anyway,
sorry about that.
No, I totally agree. It is crazy. You know, in the position where I was general manager of the organisation, you're battling with customers. I used to work with multinationals, supply multinationals. I was a couple of times I was their largest supplier, I should say. They used to send people out from the Shanghai head office to negotiate the contract with me. Now, I reckon the variations they negotiated down was less than the cost of that trip.
Yeah.
But that's what you're dealing with. So I was used to this battle, continual battle for the bottom line. Yeah.
Well, that's the Toyota system.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the cost downs. I had a number of companies say, we want you to do cost downs. So then I'd say, well, this is what you've got to do, which is the automotive system. Yeah. And they were, oh, you know about cost downs, do you? I said, yeah, if you want cost downs, you've got to meet the requirements of cost downs, not just go and force it.
That's right. And
there's some interesting stories about cost downs and how it's cost the automotive companies an absolute fortune in certain situations, but that's for another day. So I shut the company down, got all my employees who wanted a job, I got them a job, which was really good. But over that period of time, the machine was coming in later. Yeah. So I set up Keith Monaghan Consulting. Yeah. And so I took over the delivery of the machine to the university. And it was interesting, in the last week of R.E. Davison, I had became a customer ring me up and explained the situation. They said, okay, we need to do an NDA. So between Christmas and New Year, I got the NDA from the company. On the 2nd of January, I got my first phone call from the company. Yeah. Even though I'd actually been doing some work prior to that for another organisation. And so I was in Melbourne on the 4th of January from a company. Yeah. And since then, I've set up plastic moulding companies for organisations and moved them and set up Greensfield sites, but ended up working also with the Smart Centre. And my role there is to take the science and productionise it, work out production systems. And we've been working with what we call green ceramics and with Vina and the Smart Centre. Some very smart people there, some very bright people. Now, Vina is well known for her green steel and has been working a lot in this. And that's where you inject polymers into the electric arc furnaces. Yeah. And what that does is it actually puts carbon into the steel. Yeah. It also reacts with the slag to bring more steel out of the slag and reduces the amount of coking coal that goes into the furnace.
And for the layman that might be listening or watching this, the polymer was actually waste tyres, right?
Yes, that's right. We've used, so far I believe they've used over 1 million tyres.
Yeah, I've heard they're actually struggling to access them now because they've become a commodity.
Yeah, we've got organisations that are digging up landfill to get tyres, which is really good. Yeah. And we've got other areas where tyre dumps. So it is just starting to roll. That technology has been picked up in, I think, 5 countries around the world and been licensed to them. And it's now starting to expand. And based on that, we now work with green ceramics, which is a development of a floor tile. Yeah. And it's using, at the moment, we've got up to 80% waste material in it. Yeah.
It's textiles, is it?
Textiles and glass. Yeah. But we are working on other products as well. Yeah. We've done some work with Mirvac. Initially, just a little pilot, a couple of tables and such forth in a site at Marrickville, but in their latest site at Olympic Park, we've done the floor tiles, the splashback, and the island face out of these tiles. So the whole of the apartment is covered is with these tiles. Yeah. These are equivalent to a manufactured stone, so you're looking at that level of engineering, and they meet or exceed all the Australian and international standards required to go into a residential environment. Yeah. So that's strength, slip, fire, electrical conductivity, or papers, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because at one stage I worked for a company called Versatile Ceramics in their lab for the guy who was, I guess, the inventor of Versatile Ceramics, and the whole purpose of Versatile Ceramics was to be able to submerge, whether it be a bathroom vanity or a kitchen cabinet or kitchen door, which was a polymer basically, and it also had glass and other materials in it. But you've got, Vena and you guys are taking it that one step further and going fully towards a recyclable material into a finished, reusable product.
Yeah, well, we did a lot of that in what we call a basement, which we've got a lab in the basement with the press and all that in it. But we're now setting up the first off-site site at Cootamundra, and that's starting to produce product that's going out in the marketplace. And since the Australian story with Vena, we have
exploded,
been inundated, and so we're now starting to look at, okay, we need to expand. How are we going to do this? And there's a lot of work being done in that area, which is really good to see.
Yeah.
But it's been madness, absolute madness, but very enjoyable.
Yeah, she's an overnight sensation.
Oh,
the fact that it's taken 40 years for the overnight sensation.
Yeah, there's nothing overnight about it, but it's I don't know how she does it. It's like we're keeping up with her, but she just keeps going and going, which is really good. Yeah. And we're doing a lot of dynamic work, and it is really good to work and see the repurposing of all this waste material. Yeah. And it's astounding when you start looking at the amount of waste. Just for an example, in New South Wales alone, and I thought it was less, on fabrics, there's about 304,000 tonnes of fabric goes into landfill a year in New South Wales.
Particularly in fast fashion. And because my chair as the IRC for textiles, it's quite depressing to me, when we see how much, we've all got partners and daughters and so on that, they go and buy things and the swing tags remain on them in the cupboards in the house, and then you've got all the things that get thrown out every year, so it's quite depressing about how much of that asset or resource that we waste that you're putting to good use now. Yeah,
and fabric is a major problem, and there's a lot of work being done around it, how to repurpose it and reprocess it, and so it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. But we're just starting to roll, and it's interesting work, very interesting work, and they're starting to see a product that works. And the brilliant thing of this product, it is accurate. So where you do tiling, you usually have joints and that, you can butt these things up. It's a highly engineered product.
Yeah, it was interesting. I sort of diverted you away from your story about the press. When you were first consulted to University of New South Wales, and I remember the difficulty you had getting that press into the basement.
For me, it was an easy job. Nothing, and the guys I was using. But for the university, it was a difficult job, and their so-called goods lift didn't work, and I kept on saying, well, "Go through the window." Go. I can't do that, and. Right on the death knell, I got a call at 4 one morning. You can't do it. So I had to stop everything. And someone had done some mathematics on the forces on the retaining wall for the atrium and thought it would collapse. Yeah. And then at 4:30, I'm walking out and thinking, hang on, my weight and my foot area is heavier loading than that. So walking past it, I'd collapse it. Yeah. And
distribution. They're talking about one single point, whereas you're talking about distribution.
But we got it in there, and we had an audience because you can't do that. Look, just let the guys do it. We'll get it in there, no problems whatsoever. And they were astounded.
But that just shows, from theory to the physical practice of doing this stuff for industry. Unfortunately, it's the experience that is lacking, I guess, in the academic world.
That's exactly right. And they were impressed because the guy that was running the move is in his 80s. Yeah. And one of the problems is people with these skill sets are disappearing. Like the two of us, we're trying to pass our skill sets down and educate people and skill people up. But it's not happening quick enough because, again, there's this stigma against manufacturing. It came from, I think it might have been the Keating era or somewhere. Everyone should go to university. Yeah. And we're having difficulty getting people to go into manufacturing as a career. Oh, it's dirty, you don't want to do that. I found it the most exciting place to be.
Yeah.
I frustrate my wife when I walk around and say, oh, I made that.
Yeah.
Look at that, there's something I made. And I can walk into almost any place and see something that I've made in one of the organisations.
The thing is, we're all consumers.
Yeah.
You know, there's not a thing that I can't think of much that we consume that isn't manufactured.
Yeah.
You know, maybe a vegetable, but even that goes through a process.
That's right. They've got processing systems.
Yeah. So we sit here in your home, in your office. Everything in this room is manufactured in a process, in a factory or somewhere.
Yeah.
And you know, some of it in Australia, some of it not. Some of it's manufactured on site. You know, the concrete that's on the floor.
Yeah.
You know, is manufactured in situ by construction workers, but it's manufactured.
That's right.
And unfortunately, we are the virtual frogs in the pot in the manufacturing industry. We don't realise how much we rely on manufacturing and how important it is.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You're getting there's a lot of pushback. Oh, manufacturing dirty and that you don't want it next door to you and all this sort of stuff. But it's vital for the country. And the materials we use. You know, there's a great push against plastics. Now, I totally agree. Thin wall plastics and plastics in the oceans and all that, you've got to control it. But there's this thing saying, oh, the plastic moulders are the worst. They're not. The plastic moulder, that plastic pellet, is his livelihood. He's not going to let them go down the drain. He's going to reuse. In fact, out of a plastic moulder, there's very little stuff that goes into landfill. It's when you get to the next level. What do you do at the end of use when you get the plastic bag and you're going to do something with it? What are you going to do with it? Oh, it goes in the bin, goes in the landfill. Is that the right place? Have we got the right recycling systems for it?
Well, this is one of the biggest lunacies that I've found around the plastic bag debate for shopping. You know, we've now gone from those light plastic bags that were biodegradable in most cases to now a non-biodegradable bag that everyone leaves at home and then keeps buying more and more and more of.
That's right, yeah.
You know, so it might be good for the bottom line of the manufacturer of the plastic bag, which is probably in China and not in Australia. Yeah. But, you know, it's actually, we don't think through these things very well.
No. And the other thing is, we've got to get rid of thin plastics. But hang on, you've got your meat stored in the fridge. That allows you to store your meat for a period of time. That keeps your food fresh. You've got to balance it out. Yes, there is plastic bags and all that, but you've got to balance out. There is a use for plastic. Is it the right plastic? And people are starting to look at that. Oh, maybe low density polyethylene is not the right plastic. Maybe polyprop is the better plastic because it's easy to recycle and still does the same. And they're the questions that got about.
It's too complex though for the public to consume.
Yeah.
You know, and it's even this argument about, you know, at the moment the thing that frustrates me when you go and get a drink from a takeaway store and they give you a cardboard straw. Yeah. You know, which is useful as a pocket on a singlet. Yeah. But you know, I watched a documentary just recently and they talked about the amount of plastic pollution in the ocean. It's mainly fishing gear.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's mainly nets and waste flotsam and jetsam from fishing rather than, you know, what we're thinking is plastic straws.
There's a lot of fishing nets washing up on the northern shores of Australia.
Yeah.
And there is anecdotal evidence that the majority of plastic that's in the oceans comes from one area in the world. Yeah. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, I know that talking about going back to the microfactories thing, I know one of the biggest successes that Vena had up in northern Queensland was about, you know, people collecting that waste and then converting it into a polymer strand that they could actually use in 3D printing.
Yeah, it's interesting. You look at your plastics and you'll see they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as their recycling codes, and 7 is landfill. Well, 7's all this stuff, which is all high engineered polymers, ABS, polycarb, your nylons, your glass-filled nylons. We've developed ways of recycling that and producing 3D printing filament, which performs better than the commercially virgin material that's available in the marketplace and can be recycled. Yeah. The other interesting thing, we're talking about the green ceramic tiles. Yeah. They can be recycled at the end of their life.
That's great.
So it's not a one-off. When it comes back, it can be recycled.
Well, I know you're doing, and you know, I know we're jumping around a little bit here, but you know, the thing with the carbonised green steel argument, and one of the things that I always sat in the back of my head when I heard Vina talking about that, it's about heating certain materials to a certain temperature where you get the right properties out of it. And, you know, I remember seeing you when you first went and started working with New South Wales Uni, you brought a computer basically being shredded, a laptop I think it was, and all the materials that were in there, you know, the plastics, the metals, the, you know, all those sort of resources.
We're looking at, you're looking at things like surface mining, that's what the term's coming out. And if you're looking at a hard drive, your disk is an aluminium, but it's a cobalt based coating on it. Now, cobalt is a conflict mineral because the majority of it comes out of Congo. Cobalt is the basis of lithium ion. So all your lithium ion batteries have got cobalt in it, cobalt oxide in it. That carries the lithium. So all these cars, all our lithium, they've got a conflict mineral in it. But there's tons of cobalt that has potential in the computer systems. Your copper, when you mine copper, you get 2% out of the ore. If you mine copper out of a computer, you get 99.9% pure copper out of it. So there is this huge resource in e-waste that's being landfilled. And we're doing a lot of work in those areas.
Well, they need to work out how to recycle semiconductors, because from what I've read in the last few days is that the number of items that now require a semiconductor, and the semiconductor manufacturing process just won't be able to keep up. So the shortages that we're experiencing today is going to actually continue.
I know they're doing a lot of work around everything that's in e-waste, and there's some incredible product that's come out. And still a lot of it I can't talk about because it's covered by IP. But there is a lot of work. So watch this space. There's a huge lot of work we're doing. We're doing a lot of work on recycling batteries. At the moment, batteries are just crushed. The black mass goes into Singapore, and it's processed there. But again, there's so many rare earths in a battery. And so we're chasing those sort of things.
Well, this is just one of those madnesses that I think we have in Australia, is we want to consume the byproducts of, you know, these processes, but we don't want to actually be involved in them. Which I think is a bit of a crime against humanity from us as consumers in a country that enjoys the way of life that we do in the first world, that we're quite happy to, you know, have the dirty work put to others, but we're going to benefit from it. So I guess that's, you know, it's not a great note to end on, but
but look, manufacturing has to survive. For Australia to survive, manufacturing has to survive. And it's a great place to work. And you know, you and I have had good careers out of it and enjoyed it.
Well, I don't think it's going away, and that's the key thing. And one of the, you know, I guess the goals and objectives of my podcast and putting these videos on the YouTube is so people can start to understand that manufacturing is an important sector. You know, we're not all going to be aged care workers or working in health and community services, and we need to actually be raising the attention to the public, to, you know, young people and parents particularly, that there is a career, whether that career be in the bounds of, you know, your neighbourhood, or whether it be global. You know, and you've sort of expressed that yourself in your own career, where you started out, you know, in a local manufacturing company in Sydney, and you progressed your career now to something that is actually working for, you know, technology for the world in reality. So it's a great career and a great opportunity.
I really enjoyed it. You know, you look back, and I remember once having a discussion with a guy who was running another company, and we're sitting over a few beers, and he said, "Do you realise that if we were in, say, finance of that area, we wouldn't be working as hard as and we'd be paying twice. We'd get paid twice as much as what we're earning here." And I said, "Yeah, but we see what we make and we see the effect." He said, "Yeah, that's why we do it."
Yeah, and the alternative is, I think if I worked in the finance industry, I'd be depressed.
So, but that's it. We've added value. We've added value to our lives, to the lives of people around it, and to the country. And I remember when I did Train the Trainer, one of the courses I did, I was the only one from manufacturing in that course. It was a very intense 4-day course, and we had to do presentations. and everyone else was in various service industries, banks, accountancy, and all that. And I asked the question in my presentation, what have you done or your organisation has done to add value to this country and reduce its dependence on overseas income, overseas inputs, I should say.
Yeah.
And they all sat there and said, nothing. And I said, well, my organisation, we make parts in Australia so that we don't have to import them. And we export product.
Yeah.
So we are adding value to the country.
Yeah. So on that note, thanks Keith. I
No,
really appreciate
thank
it. It's great having a chat.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be the last, and I'd really like to deep dive into some of these other subjects and even get you in the room with some of the other people who we know.
Actually, that would be an interesting, especially some of the people we know. I think it would be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, as the awareness comes on with the podcast and people at the moment, we've got a small following, and at the moment it's only really being marketed through my news feed. But I'll send a link to you, and if you want to share it amongst your community, that'd be great. The more subscribers we get and get the word out, that'd be fantastic.
Yep, no, sounds good.
All right, thanks.
Good on you, mate. Thanks for that. It was a pleasure.
Bye.